us move to the background of the context of Lamentations. The book of Lamentation was written in response to the destructions of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, traditionally attributed to the prophet Jeremiah, and this book captures the deep sorrow, trauma, and grave experiences by the people of Judah after the fall of their temple and their city. Written in poetic and erotic forms, Lamentations express not only national mourning but also theological struggles wrestling with God's justice, judgment, and mercy. The first two chapters focus on the solutions of the city and the suffering of the people, the attributing of the calamity to their sins and God's righteous anger. Yet in the midst of the devastation, the book also contains movements of reflections and expressions of hope in God's enduring faithfulness. We will concentrate only on Lamentations chapter 3 verses 20 to 26. So let's see the immediate context of chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the centerpiece of Lamentations and shifts from communal grief to personal laments. The speaker recounts his own suffering and emotional, like reflecting the broader conditions of the nation. In verse 20 to 26, the tone changed significantly from despair to hope. The speakers remember his affection, but deliberately recalls God's process, love, compassion, and faithfulness. This remembrance becomes the foundations for new hope. He affirmed that God's mercy are new every morning, and it is good to wait quietly for the Lord's salvation. This verse offers theological turning points in the book, emphasizing that even in the midst of judgments and suffering, God remains compassionate and trustworthy. With that, I have 5 points. So let's directly jump to the first point. The ways of remembered suffering. The first point, the ways of remembered suffering based on verse 20. In this verse, Jeremiah describes how the memory of suffering claims to him its content and overwhelming. The phrase, "my soul continually remember it," suggests that the pain is not afflicting through but a present emotional weight. The devastations of Jerusalem, the loss of life, the destructions of the temple, and the chaos of exiles are not just historical events. They are personal, deep felt. His soul is brought out, showing the impact of grief not only on the mind but on the heart and spirit. This verse captures two profound truths, both human experience. Sometimes pain doesn't just happen in a moment, but it stays with us. Like trauma, loss, disappointments can live in our memory, and when we revisit them, it can feel as heavy as when they start occurring. Jeremiah doesn't try to ignore or minimize his suffering. He names it and acknowledges it. And these honest confrontations with pain is actually to the doorways to heal and hope. your listening. It says, these hearts, but I will believe your listening. For the second point, choosing to remember God's trust and truth. Choosing to remember God's truth based on verse 21. This verse makes a crucial turning point in the message and Jeremiah's internal struggle. After recounting the ways of his sorrow in verse 20, he intentionally chose to shift his focus. That phrase, but this I call to mind, the phrase that is given, but this I call to mind, suggests that deliberate mental action he is not excessively overwhelmed by his thought. He takes control of them. Rather than continuing the journey solely on suffering, he decided to bring a different truth into view, that is the character and faithfulness of God. That doesn't mean that the pain disappears. It means that alongside the pain, the greater reality is brought forward. Jeremiah acknowledged that hope is not accidental. It's not something that simply appears when circumstances approve. Hope is intentional discipline to choose to remember who God is, even when everything around us suggests otherwise. When our life feels overwhelming, our minds naturally replace fears, failures, or regrets. These mental blocks can deepen despair, but these limitations, chapter 3 shows us that there's another way. We can choose what to focus on instead of letting our memory define us. We can bring God's truth to the forefront of our mind. These days, spiritual disciplines like training our thoughts to dwell on God's character, His promise, and His past faithfulness. When we call to mind God's mercy, sovereignty, and goodness, hope rises not because the pain is gone, but because when we remember, we are not alone in it. For the third point, God's unfailing love and daily mercy. God's unfailing love and daily mercy. Based on verses 22 to 23. These verses are the heart of Jeremiah's hope, even in the face missionary tragedy and personal sorrow. He affirmed that God's steadfast love, in Hebrew word hesed, God's steadfast love, is unbreakable. Is convenient, love, loyal, committed, and undeserved, despite the judgments of Judah face. God's mercy is not used up. In fact, it arrives fresh every single day, like a morning light after a long night. His faithfulness is not based on our performance, but on His unchanging character. This means we are never too far to get His mercy again. Waking up every morning, every day is not just a routine, it is signs that God has chosen to sustain your life again. Every day that you take a breath is not just a routine, it's not just a usual, it is a gift from God. The moments when you struggle, that you have a strength to clarity, there is not a strength that we all have from our performance. There is a gift from God. Even in hard seasons, we are surrounded by daily signs of God's love, whether it is big or small. When we feel we are failed or we are too broken, This verse reminds us that God's mercy doesn't run out. He meets us with it every morning without fail. For the 4th point, God is our portion. God is our portion based on verse 24. Based on verse 24. Portions. In ancient Israel, the word portions often refers to a person's inheritance, particularly like lands, something secured, valuable, or lasting. For the Levites who had no past land's inheritance, the Lord Himself was their portions. We can see it in Numbers chapter 18, verse 20. He was their source. That means He was their source, security, and reward. Jeremiah borrows this image to make profound declaration, even though the lands, the city, the temple, everything was gone. But God Himself remains in them. He is not just a giver of blessing, He is a blessing. Jeremiah recognized that when everything else is stripped away, God is still more than enough for us. We often place our hope in these weekend laws like job, relationship, health, finance, status, many things we can lose. But when those are taken away, what remains in us? If God is truly your portion, then your foundation will be unshakable. You can lose worldly security and still be anchored in peace because your deepest need is already met in Him. This verse invites us to shift our source of hope from what God gives to who God is. So let us think again. When we feel depressed, we lost everything. During that time, what will we need in us? What can make us to give us hope again? For the next ones, waiting and seeking God. Based on verse 25 to 26. Waiting and seeking God. Based on verses 25 to 26. These verses highlight two key spiritual practices, which is waiting and seeking. Waiting on God isn't passive or lazy. It's quiet. Trusting surrender that believes God is working when we can't even see it, when we can't even know it, but God's still working. And seeking God means desiring His presence more than just He answers. In the middle of devastation, Jeremiah affirmed that God is still good to those who approach Him with expect faith. Waiting quietly is hard, especially when we feel in pain, when we feel in loss. But this is often in the silence that God is doing the best work for us. In a cultural, obsessed with speech and insults result, when we wait, we feel like we're wasting our time. But in God's economy, waiting is often where transformations happens, when our spiritual transformation occurs. When we were forced to slow down, to pray and depend on Him, our roots of faith grow deeper. Don't rush the process. God's timing is always right, even when it's slow by our standard. Trust Him and waiting, and seek Him not just for what He can do, but for who He is. For that last, Jeremiah teaches us the hope isn't found our circumstances, but in God Himself. His love never fails. His mercy are renewed every morning. And He is always enough for us to have a home in Him. When we wait on Him and seek His presence, we discover that our hope grows even in suffering. So whenever we are facing, we should remember that God is our portion, and in Him there is always hope. For that, when we read this Jeremiah chapter 3 verses 20 to 26,